Today is your lucky day. The champ uploaded a new video and you found it. I'm joking. It's your lucky day because Islamnet is establishing a mega masjid and da'wah center, and you have a unique opportunity to be part of that. So click the link below and donate now. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. How are you guys doing? And welcome to the third and final session of the Trinity, but more specifically, actually, this is going to be an interactive session where we're going to be doing some debates and interesting things together. I want to start this session in a, you can call it unconventional manner, by talking about debates in general. Debates in general. Not talking about whether we should be doing it or not. I think we've passed that stage. Of course, debates can be sometimes detrimental. For example, if you're doing them with your wife, if you're doing them with people that you shouldn't be doing them with. But sometimes debates can be useful, which is why, for example, from our perspective, we mention the Quran. And وَجَادِلْهُمْ بِالَّتِي هِيَ أَحْسَنُ, and debate with them in the way that is better. But I really wanted to just think about debates in a different kind of way, because debates, there's an aspect of debates which is, I would say, empirical and more like a science. And there's an aspect of debates which is more like an art. Okay, and everyone here, if you want to get into this, I mean, we have a world-class debater in the audience as well. We've got Sabur Ahmed, who's been involved in no less than 200-300 informal debates and multiple professional and formal debates. So he's going to be in the room too, and I'm looking for your contributions in this matter. But debates, I don't know if you would agree with this, Sabur, but I think there's an aspect of it which is more scientific, or more like a science, and more an aspect of it which is more like an art. Which brings me to, I'm going to call this the general template. Okay, the general template. And there's two things I want to cover before we get started. Okay, the general template, okay, which is what I'm going to tell you, 3 things that you should be thinking about before you get into any debate. And number 2, rhetoric, which is, in many ways, you could argue, in some instances, even more important than the arguments that one can make. And I'll define that for you, and I'll tell you why that's important. And then we'll go into some of the sparring rounds, if you like. You can test out using this template and using what we talked about, and also using session 1 and 2, the arguments that we've already gone through in terms of the Trinity, as the topic of discussion. So in terms of the general template, the way I like to think about it, okay, and I, behind the scenes, a bit like Sabur, a bit like many other people, when people are doing high profile debates, this is the template I give them when we're doing the training with them. Number 1 is that there are 3 things that you need to have before you go into a debate. Number 1 is the arguments. Okay, number 1 are arguments. And depending on the format of the debate, you want to have more arguments or you want to have less arguments. I mean, the general rule is less is more. And this is what Sabur always used to advise me when I used to go into debates, is less is more. It's better to make 2 or 3 good arguments that the audience can remember than to make 6 or 7 arguments that the audience will not remember. Sometimes we think that the more arguments we make, the more clever we will sound, whatever. Sticking to 2 or 3 arguments can be good. And connected to the arguments that you make is the counter arguments, or the objections that you're going to be handling. Because don't think that you're just going to a debate and the other person, the interlocutor, is not going to have their own arguments. So you have this first subsection, which you can call it arguments. And underneath it you have arguments, your own offensive, if you like, arguments. And then you have counter arguments or objection handling. So these are the 2 aspects. There's no other thing. Okay, so the first thing we said was arguments. The second thing is strategy. Okay. Now, a strategy is an overarching way wherein which someone achieves a particular objective. All right, I know Sabur has so much information about, he's read all of these guys, the strategists, and they've become very obsessive about the matter, and military strategists and this and that and the other. But it's a lot of the same thing applies. And most military strategists say there's a difference between number 2 and 3, which is tactics. There's a difference between strategies and tactics. And we'll talk about the difference in the context of debates and also in general. But a strategy is that you have a plan to get to your destination. Now, let me give an example of a strategy. For example, football, 11-a-side football, for example, a counter-attack strategy. We were just talking about, like, for example, we were watching Morocco in the World Cup and how they were responding. They kind of understood how to deal with the bigger teams, like, you know, like Portugal and Spain and so on. So they would, whenever they get the ball, they would counter. So you can call this, and many fighters, we were talking about fighting before this, because obviously the big fight's coming on the 14th, that there's a counter-attack strategy. And many fighters, I was just talking to Roy Jones Jr., you know, one of the great boxers of our time, and Carlos was there, was filming it as well. And he said that, you know, he would just counter. So much so that some of his opponents, because he kept countering, they didn't want to punch in the first place. It debilitated them. So the art of countering is wait for your opponent to make the argument first. You stay quiet. You wait for them to make the first move. And then from whatever they've done and said, then you respond. So you're waiting for them. You kind of know what they're going to do. And based on what they've said, you're going to counter them.
Like that thing is,
yeah.
Never interrupt your enemy when they're making a mistake.
Yeah. So this is number 2. Number 3 is tactics. Now, tactics are, you know, specific ways which you enact your strategy. So, for example, in the football context, passing in a particular manner, crossing in a particular manner. That's not a strategy. That's more of that's a tactical thing. You know, or for example, in a debate context, body language using particular cues or particular insults. And we'll get to insults in a second, because you might think, what the hell is he talking about? This people that tell you ad hominem fallacy and stuff, throw that in the bin. Throw that thing in the bin. I mean, or ad hominem fallacies when you attack the person. Sometimes you need to attack the people. And we'll talk about that, especially in the art of humiliation. And this might sound completely off key, but there is a time where you need to humiliate somebody in a debate. And that's how you win. It's part of the strategy, where you may say, well, that's not my style. I say, respect to you. Respect to you. However, if you need to do it, you might be at work. You might not even be in a debate context. Somebody might be humiliating you. Your co-worker is actually humiliating you. And the most appropriate response is to humiliate them back. And this is in fact what happened in the Quran. إِن تَسْخَرُوا مِنَّا فَإِنَّا نَسْخَرُ مِنْكُمْ كَمَا تَسْخَرُونَ. Where Noah said that if you try and mock us, we will mock you as you mock us. So mockery, there is a place for that in debate sometimes. There is a place. Arguable, and some people will remove it completely from the repertoire. And I appreciate that. But as I say, debating is more like an art than it is a science, and do what you want with it.
Can I just add
Of course.
So a good way of thinking about it is a strategy is to, for example, put your opponent in a dilemma where they are going to make, then you're not giving them a problem to solve.
Yes.
You're basically telling them it's either going to be this way or that way. So for example, you cite a particular academic and you say to them, well, you need to prove that this academic that you were refuting is actually wrong. Now, if he doesn't attack the academic, you can say you're a coward. And if they do attack the academic, you're basically saying, so you're taking on an academic. So you're giving them a dilemma. So that's the strategy. And the tactic within that is, for example, use of certain words in a rhetorical way. So for example, really? You want to attack that guy? Like really? Like, so always think of it from the perspective that tactics are kind of dispensable, but the strategy is indispensable. And the strategy has to begin off with how you want the audience to feel about that person. Because people don't remember what you say, they remember how you made them feel, and they remember really how you made the opponent look like. That's what's most important.
This is a phenomenal point, because it's what you're saying here, that this should be almost quoted, that, you know, tactics are dispensable, but strategies are indispensable. This is a very important thing. Tactics are the most, of the 3 things that we spoke about, malleable things. And arguments, on the other hand, and strategies, they're not that malleable. You've got to have one strategy of dealing with the situation. Otherwise, you're aimless here. So these are the 3. You've got to think about any debate. You're going to think, what are my arguments? What are my counter-argument objections? Number 1. Number 2, what is my strategy? And number 3 is, what are my tactics? Now, the second part of what I'm talking to you about is rhetoric. Now, rhetoric is such an important thing. And I'll tell you something. I mean, it's so important. It's one of the ways that scholars of Islam say that Islam proves itself. and that the Quran itself is from God. That how to prove the Quran is from God through the rhetoric, the balagha, it's called balagha in Arabic, of the Quran. And therefore, from our perspective as Muslims, the most rhetorical book, from a linguistic perspective, is in fact the Quran. But somebody could argue that if the Quran is so rhetorical, the verses of the Quran, that, sorry to say, seem quite mundane in terms of their information. How can you allege that such verses are using rhetorical devices? For example, لِلذَّكَرِ مِثْلُ حَظِّ الْأُنْثَيَيْنِ, that to the male is double of what the female has, or the inheritance laws, or this or that and the other. These is mathematical things almost. Now, by the way, I mean, even those verses have a rhyme scheme, etc. But before that, the Arab rhetoricians, they have a particular definition of rhetoric, which I think is quite interesting for our purposes, which is that rhetorical speech is speech which is mutabaqan. It is in line with the situation which is happening at that current moment. So, for example, what is the most appropriate use of language in a news forecast? Like someone is telling you what it's going to be, what the weather is going to be in like in the next couple of days.
Red alert.
No, let's say for example it's just normal weather, like 17 degrees, whatever. If someone were to start speaking in a very persuasive manner in this context and started flaring their arms and say, "Oh, the weather is going to be 17 degrees Celsius," would it make sense? And it would, to the end user, it would kind of seem a little bit off-putting. You wouldn't want to see that person again, or you would assume that that person doesn't know how to react or doesn't know how to use words in a particular situation. So when you consider that true rhetoric is when you use certain words appropriately in a specific situation, then let's go back to the inheritance verses or any other verses that speak about things which are quote unquote seemingly mundane, which are actually guidance for us, etc. But those are rhetorical from that angle, not necessarily from the angle that they're using lots of emotive language or persuasive devices. Cicero had a very, very interesting, understanding of rhetoric. And Cicero basically emphasized the role of emotion. And just exactly what Sabur mentioned, that the people don't remember what you say, but they remember how you made them feel. So Cicero is talking about if you want to be rhetorical, you have to engage emotionally with the audience. And that's in fact what Aristotle said as well, and he called that pathos. Pathos is your ability to engage emotionally with the end user. And you will find that this is all over the Quran, and this is where the real study of the Quran, one day inshallah we'll go through this together and we'll talk about how the Quran uses rhetorical devices. For example, how many rhetorical questions are in the Quran? Al-Qari'atu mal-Qari'a, wa ma adraka mal-Qari'a. The calamity. And what is the calamity? And what will make you know what the calamity is? Can you see? 3 questions, and it's all building suspense. When I used to teach English, and I used to teach kids actually rhetorical devices in English. That was one of the things I used to teach them. Basic things. I mean, you've got to have some of them up your sleeve. Emotive language, rule of 3, alliteration, assonance, sibilance. It's so easy to do. All you've got to do is get 2 words with the same letter, for example, or mention 3 adjectives in it, because you want to sound rhythmic. Sometimes it's good to use big words, and sometimes it's not good to use big words. Sometimes it's good to use. Sometimes I intentionally use big words as a means of amusing the audience. Why do you want to pontificate in a Sesquipedalian way? Whatever. What's he saying? Is he even speaking English? Yeah. You know what I mean? So you can throw that in. It's like salt in the food, but as my dad would tell me, that if you put too much of it, the food becomes ruined. So you can do whatever you like in terms of rhetoric. There are lots of things you can do there. But the main point is to engage the end user in some rhetorical way. It's a bit like music, actually. Very similar. Music, the reason why people listen to it is because they're using chords, they're using instruments, and they're using voice and lyrics in combination, in concert with one another, to engage with a person emotionally. In many ways, music is one of the best expressions of rhetoric humankind has ever known. Even though, obviously, I'm not talking about halal or haram, I'm just telling you. Like, the idea is, why they got 5 billion views on YouTube for a music video? 6 billion. How many people on the earth anyway? How could that even be the case? Even the children are listening to this? The babies? I don't know how that happened, by the way. You got some tracks that got 6 billion views. But the point I'm making is because the combination of chords that are being used, they're doing something to a human being. But what's more impressive is, without any chords, the Quran, for instance, just uses words, and the combination of words is having such and such effect on human beings. That's really where the miracle of the Quran is, by the way. Okay, so what we're going to do in the next 20 to 30 minutes is we'll have the class divided into 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, yeah? And Ali's going to come, so that's going to be 10. So 5 and 5. And so we'll have 4 on this for now, and then 4 verses 5. And then when Ali comes, we'll make it 5 verses 5. And we have, I'll give you 5 or 10 minutes just to prepare with the person next to you, your arguments, your strategies, and your tactics. And we're going to have one-on-ones, Christian versus Muslim. Okay? Christian versus Muslim. And then we're going to switch. So everyone's going to get a chance. And I'm going to time this one. So everyone's going to have 2 minutes. I'm thinking 90 seconds to 2 minutes. Maybe 90 seconds even, to make a point. Yeah, and then that person's going to make a counter argument, and then we're going to switch over. And I'm going to give the left group, the initiative, meaning you're going to make the first argument, you're going to start, and you're going to have the counter. And you're going to go back and forth twice, and then we're going to switch over and do the same thing again, using the arguments that we've already spoken about in the first and the second session. So I'll give you guys a good 5-10 minutes to prepare for the arguments. And did I say I'm going to give you guys the initiative, right? Christians. And then you guys will respond in kind, and then we'll switch over.
Hey you! Are you watching my videos again? Pause that and do something for your akhirah first. Islamnet is establishing a Scandinavian mega mosque and da'wah center in Oslo, the fastest growing city in Europe. Do you want to share in that reward? Click the link below and donate now.